He's Doc Emrick, NHL and NBC play-by-play announcer, the sportscaster of the year. And I know this isn't the man cave you wanted to come into.
It's fine.
You want to shoot hoops, so you want to go to the other one now. Now, you know if you go in there, it's on. I mean, it's a competition.
I know.
And I won't treat you as a guest if you go in there.
Dislocated left shoulder.
No excuses, Don.
No, I want to get this in at the start. In another life, I was a bowling coach at Geneva College. And before one of our big matches, our number 3 guy came up and said, I've got a bad shoulder. I just want to get that in before we start. And so I want to get that in before we start. But anyway, you had Steve Alford on yesterday.
Yes.
Now, Steve's first coaching job in college was at Manchester College, the place that I went to and graduated. They had lighter standards then. But at one of his practices, his players were bragging about their ability to shoot fouls. This is on the subject of what we're talking about.
No.
And he stepped out onto the court
Yeah.
and hit 227 in a row. And they didn't brag about their foul shooting anymore. Now, after it gets to the first 150 and guys are shooting balls back to him so he can keep going, what can your reaction be at that point? He had a marvelous record there, turned around a team that was terrible, and they won championships, and the rest is history.
And look at him now.
Yep.
Head coach at UCLA. Pre-game routine for you.
Yeah.
What do you do that's different, quirky, getting ready for a game?
I like to look up unusual things about the players, biographical things that I think will be fun for people to know. Look up weird things that happened in history. A guy and his wife were married on a Zamboni one night in the minors and they rode off. Or a player was the first ever to score a goal into the other team's net, a goaltender. And only 800 people were there, but I'm sure 100,000 say they were. Those kinds of things. Birthdays and also, at this point in the year, we have Philly and New York tonight, the Rangers, and only 1 point apart in the standings. But the part of this that I like is 24 minor penalties in 3 games, 8 majors, 7 misconducts, 1 ejection, Wednesday night rivalry. That's what I like.
When people say to you, why do we have to have hockey, fighting in hockey?
Mm-hmm.
How do you respond?
The perception of violence today is so much different than it was when I first broke in, that anything that you say is always going to be turned right back to you pretty quickly. But this is a sport that has collision at high speed and continuing play after the collision. And it has players of all sizes, from 5'5" on up to 6'9", and weights from 165 on up to 270. And when you have that at a high speed and you get keyed up, the aftermath of that is you catch somebody with a stick, or you slug them, or you attack them from behind, or you say, this is the honorable way that we've always done it. European players are not raised with this. North Americans are, particularly Canadians. And all of this, for people who feel that games are too violent today, this will roll right past them, and they'll say, well, there's just another dinosaur. Doc's a dinosaur. But is the checks and balances of the sport still to this day? And as long as it continues to operate, some of us enjoy the fact that, not necessarily the fight, but the fact that this game is played aggressively. And you will find people such as Phil Jackson, who have talked about watching hockey in the spring, and Matt Millen, who did not understand how these guys could do it 4 days a week when football players do it only 1, that still admire the tenaciousness and how rough this game is. Call it violent if you want.
Are you in favor of fighting?
Yeah, I don't have, let's just put it this way. I don't have any problem with it being in the rule book, but I think it's going to die its own death because we now have full-face shields, and it's going to take away the reason to do it, or at least the want to do it. There was, a long time ago, I just heard this story last year, a general manager of a Western junior team who had just come back. He had the visors removed from his players' helmets, put in the skate sharpener so they would be razor sharp, and reattached. Now that's going a little too far, so that in case a fist came around and caught one of those visors, it was like a razor.
How do you call
That's
a fight?
crazy.
How do you call a fight as a play-by-play?
On television, you back off, and sometimes you'll say, oh, what a haymaker that was, because people can watch the fight, and our cameras are pretty tight on it. We had one between the Devils and the Rangers a couple of years ago where the fight started at the opening face-off. And there were 3 separate fights, and fortunately we had cameras that could cover all of them. And what you need to do then is identify the players, because sometimes with the jerseys being pulled, people don't know who's going at one another. But it's still a part of the sport that exists and excites some people. I've seen games that have been marvelous without fights and those that have had them with them. And John Ferguson's old slogan that it can change a hockey game still occurs. There was a coach who's still coaching and so must remain anonymous. He said there's only one team that can win a regular season game through physical intimidation and fighting. You want to guess? Philly.
Yeah.
They can still do it. Now, playoffs a different story. Not much fighting in the playoffs, but Philly can still win games that way.
He's Doc Emrick, NHL on NBC play-by-play announcer. Rangers Flyers coming up tonight on NBC SM. I hear this, Gretzky has alluded to this before to me, that if he played now, he'd have a hard time scoring 50 goals. But my argument is, if I had Sidney Crosby or some of those players go back to when Gretzky was playing, the physicality of that sport, even going back to where Gordie Howe played. So if I'm going to put Gordie Howe into today's game or Wayne Gretzky, or I'm going to take Sidney Crosby back to Gretzky or Gordie Howe, how different are their careers if I did something like that?
It's an interesting question. I'll tell you this, that when Wayne Gretzky must have won 20 cars in his lifetime, one of the first cars after he gave one to his father was to Dave Semenko.
Oh.
Dave Semenko was a mean-spirited, huge guy that once fought Muhammad Ali in a 3-round exhibition in Edmonton. Story for another time.
Wasn't his nickname Cement Head?
Oh, yeah, but that was what the others called him before they had to fight him. Yeah, that's usually what prompted the fight. But he basically, whenever things got a little tough out there, he would take a shift with Wayne, and all of a sudden things would calm down. Tony Twist and Kelly Chase both feel the same way in St. Louis because they were the guys that ran shotgun there. And today, if Sidney had one of those guys, he'd probably have another 25 points. And that's not to say we should bring back that time. I'm just saying that in that era that you've asked me to go back to, that's how it was done. And Gordie Howe, the first thing he'd do is put on a helmet now because, you know, the shots go. Well, yeah, maybe. Yeah, he was pretty tough, but the shots come so much faster. The guys are bigger, stronger, faster, all of those cliches, but they're cliches because they're true.
We'll take a break. We'll come back with Doc Emrick because I want to ask you, how many different words can you use for the
to
word
describe Seton?
pass?
We left him out last time, remember?
I know you did.
Yeah.
Not many, apparently.
He actually, he wrote it in his notebook here. The note, right? Coming back from Russia.
It's in the front, yeah.
Doc wrote down the Danettes' names, and he felt terrible because he said, I left out Seton. And so I'm flying back from the Olympics, and here's Doc who's going, I left out Seton. Man, I can't believe it.
It's all right. I'm
that.
over it.
Yeah.
It doesn't bother me.
Sort of over him.
Don't worry about
All right,
it.
we'll come back.
He was suspended.
The different words that you could use for pass. We'll continue with Doc Emrick. We'll do so next. Okay, how about we get Doc calling you? Use the broom as your hockey stick. We have budget constraints here, Doc. Yeah, just like
What is that? It's
That's a coaster, I think, for last night's beer.
When you're ready, we're ready.
Okay.
Yeah, you tell me when.
All right, ready? Go.
It's O'Connor moving in on goal against McLovin. He scores a soft goal on a poor goaltender.
I'm like a cat.
Yeah, how did you get ripped?
You found a 5-hole.
You weren't exactly. I think you had a lot of holes.
How great is that?
You weren't exactly a Patrick Waugh there.
What did I say? I have a huge
butterfly.
I have a huge 5-hole.
Jonathan Slow is who you are, not Jonathan Quick.
A soft goal and a poor goaltender.
Doc Emrick, NHL on NBC and NBCSN. You got Rangers Flyers tonight on NBCSN. Top 3 teams with the most major penalties. Any idea there, Doc?
Philly, Boston. Oh, for fighting or just majors?
Majors. Most major penalties this year. This, let's see, they're Eastern Conference, most of them with the Eastern Conference. So it's 4 of the 5 Eastern Conference. Who has the most major penalties?
Philly and Boston are tied for second.
Yes, they are at 43. Vancouver, then the Canadians, but this is number 1.
I should know who number 1 is. Philly's number 1 in overall penalties. I don't know.
Toronto.
Toronto.
Yeah.
They tend to be tend to be one of the more aggressive teams, and boy, they need something right now because they're falling out of it. We have a 4-way tie for 2 spots now in the East with 2.5 weeks to go. Great.
I saw a website that counted the number of words you used to describe the pass. What's your favorite word? I'm like James Lipton here inside the Actors Studio. Your favorite word for pass.
Well, I'm glad you asked me my favorite real word rather than the ones he asks about.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess I never think about the words. They just sort of...
Spirits hit, slides, fiddles, rattles, forks,
Hammers, I like.
shovels.
I like hammers.
Hammers.
Hammers
Rifle.
or hatchets. You know, those are good action words, especially if it's butchered back in. But I don't...
Plunged, forces, handed, threw it, punched, pushes, flipped, dragging, soccered it.
Well, I'm flattered that somebody wrote them down, but do they not have another use for their time?
Apparently not.
Okay.
I think they're impressed by it. But that's
I'm glad they are, but
Done.
it's not planned. It just sort of happens.
so. Your favorite word for pass is
Hammered.
hammered.
Yeah, especially when it's when it's driven in and somebody's rushing in to get it. I guess it's not a player-to-player pass. It's more of an action play.
When people know what you do and who you are, is there can you call my name, announce my name, give me a play-by-play, anything like that?
Yeah, sometimes they ask for that. And I remember Gene Hart, when he was the announcer in Philadelphia, he was asked at an airport once to yell score. And it was by a young man who was there with his girlfriend. And he said, I don't know, I'm not in a hockey rink. I mean, if I were to just say, kiss your girlfriend, right? How would you feel? It's not that I don't like that. It's just I don't know. The whole emotion is not there for it when it's in an airport. Yet I do like the fact that people feel free to come up to me because that's nice. It's nice that they feel that they can, and they do. So that's good.
If you gave advice to somebody on just doing play-by-play, not just hockey, but what's the one thing you must have?
Never quit. It has nothing to do with your delivery or anything else. It's just don't quit because there's so much rejection and so much frustration as you start out. I always tell people, and I ask them to send me the cassette. Go into an arena, do the sport that you like to do, sit up in the corner where you're not intimidated by all the crowd or anything, and just call the game. And then do another one, and then do 5 more. And when you get to one you like, send it to me, and I'll listen to it and tell you what I think. But the main thing is just keep doing it. If this is what you like, you get a good seat for the game, you get in free, you get to work with the best athletes in the world if you wind up in the NHL, and it's a fun way to make a living. It's like being in the frat, as these guys know. It's like being in the frat your whole life.
Yeah. But you have an ability here to be selfless in a day and age where announcers are selfish, that we get in the way of it. You push the product out. How did you learn that?
I guess I just didn't. I can't, as you'll see, I can't shoot foul shots. I can't play the sport, but I always admired the people who could. And I admired the courage of people who played it for $6,000 a year when I was growing up and had stitched faces and all of that. And you realize these are warriors that really like their sport. And I think that's the one thing that I want people to know. You try to enhance the game but not get in the way of it because these are the guys that are doing it. And this is the year that we're finding out how well they do it because they've had Olympics and they're down the home stretch of playoff runs and they're going to go, 2 of them are going to go right to the middle part of June. And Phil Jackson and people like that are going to watch because they say there's nothing better than playoff hockey, and that's because these guys are warriors. It's easy when you recognize that to stay out of the way.
All right, final 30 seconds. Just validate when I picked the LA Kings to win it all, and you and Pierre Maguire scoffed at me at the Emmys.
I did not.
I felt like that.
Well, I did not. As a matter of fact, I said before we were on.
I think it was
at the Garden,
like the beer snob who looked down upon me last night. You were the hockey snob, as if to say, "What do you know?"
Pilsner,
talking hairdo. Yeah. You and Pierre Maguire are like, look at you guys.
Bottom line is, you were right.
Thank you.
And we were wrong. He was right.
He's the great Doc Emrick. The Flyers Rangers tonight on NBCSN. Thanks for joining us, Doc.